"I'd like to make a toast," Vincent announced, raising his crystal champagne flute with practiced elegance. The crowd of well-dressed guests in his expansive living room turned to face him, conversations fading to attentive silence. His eyes gleamed with that familiar excitement I'd seen countless times since childhood, the look that always appeared when he was about to command everyone's attention. To new beginnings, new homes, and... He paused dramatically, his gaze sweeping across the room before landing momentarily on me, to Grandpa Walter's memory. A respectful hush fell over the gathering. Our grandfather had passed away just 4 days ago, and the loss still felt raw, an open wound that hadn't even begun to heal. I raised my glass alongside everyone else, my throat tight with emotion as I silently honored the man who had shaped so much of who I'd become. The amber liquid in my glass caught the light from the chandelier overhead, reminding me of how sunlight filtered through the old windows of Grandpa's lakeside cabin on summer afternoons. "Speaking of Grandpa Walter," Vincent continued, setting his drink down on the marble-topped coffee table with a soft clink, "I have an announcement to make." My stomach tensed as I watched him reach into the breast pocket of his tailored suit and extract an envelope, its edges slightly worn. The confidence in his movements made my skin prickle with unease. Vincent's eyes flicked toward me for just a moment, long enough for me to catch something calculating in his expression. "Before he died, Grandpa gave me this letter," Vincent announced, his voice projecting effortlessly across the high-ceilinged room of his new suburban estate. "He wanted me to have his historic lakeside property, including plans for developing the surrounding area into what he called the Mitchell Heritage District." The room erupted in surprised murmurs and enthusiastic congratulations. My father, Daniel, nodded with obvious pride, while my mother, Margaret, immediately began discussing the historical significance of the area with the guests nearest to her. Vincent's fiancée, Gabriella, clapped her hands in delight, already talking about restoration opportunities with animated gestures. Across the room, my best friend Naomi shot me a bewildered look, her journalist's instincts clearly triggered. She, more than anyone else here, knew how deeply connected Grandpa Walter and I had been through our shared passion for historical preservation. I sat frozen, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. The lakeside property wasn't just any vacation home, it was a historically significant 19th-century cabin that Grandpa Walter had lovingly restored and protected. It was where I'd spent nearly every weekend for the past 3 years, helping him document the architecture, cataloging artifacts, and recording his stories about the region's history. Those conversations had inspired my doctoral thesis and eventually my career path. Vincent, with his real estate development business, had visited perhaps twice in the last 5 years, always complaining about the primitive conditions and lack of modern amenities. But more importantly, Grandpa Walter had entrusted me with a weathered wooden archival box 3 weeks ago, making me promise not to open it until the historical record needed to be set straight, as he'd put it. Inside was a notarized deed transferring ownership of the property to me, along with documentation for its historic designation application. He had already legally given me the property, it wasn't even part of his estate. As Vincent unfolded the letter and began reciting what were supposedly Grandpa's wishes for commercial development of the property, I studied his face intently. The confident smile, the theatrical hand gestures, was he lying? Did he somehow know about the deed? Had Grandpa Walter changed his mind without telling me? "That's wonderful, Vincent. Congratulations," I managed to say with a forced smile that felt brittle on my face, even as my pulse raced with confusion and growing anger. "If you'll excuse me, I need to step away for a moment." I needed to get to my office at the university and check the documents in that archival box immediately. I quietly excused myself, murmuring something about needing to use the restroom, and slipped away from the crowd now buzzing with excited conversation about Vincent's development plans. As I closed the bathroom door behind me, I leaned heavily against it and tried to steady my breathing. The letter Vincent had displayed made no sense. Grandpa Walter's handwriting had grown increasingly shaky in his final months due to severe arthritis, a fact I knew intimately from helping him document his architectural drawings. But the signature I'd glimpsed looked suspiciously smooth and confident, nothing like the painstaking script I'd watched him struggle with. My phone vibrated with a text from Naomi. "You okay?" That announcement was bizarre. Vincent never showed any interest in historical preservation. And wasn't that property already part of your joint conservation project? I quickly texted back, "Need to check some documents at my office. Can you make excuses for me? Say the department called with an emergency?" Within minutes, Naomi had smoothly covered for my departure, and I slipped out through the kitchen and side door while the guests continued to congratulate Vincent on his inheritance and ambitious development plans. The drive to my small house in the university's historic district felt dreamlike, my thoughts swirling with confusion. Street lamps blurred past as memories of Grandpa Walter flooded my mind, his patient explanations of architectural details as we documented the cabin's unique construction methods, his excitement when we discovered original survey maps in the county archives, his laughter when I'd tried to use period tools to repair a section of weathered siding. The lakeside property wasn't just real estate, it was a living museum of regional history and our family's connection to it. It was our special place, where Grandpa Walter had taught me about the importance of preserving the past while building thoughtfully toward the future. Vincent had never shown any interest in those values or the property's historical significance. His announcement felt like a violation of everything Grandpa Walter had stood for and everything we had worked to protect. Tears blurred my vision as I continued reading the letter, Grandpa Walter's distinctive handwriting growing more unsteady toward the end of the page. "I know your brother might contest this designation and transfer of ownership, which is why I've had everything properly notarized and filed with the Historical Preservation Commission. Attorney Harold Thompson has all the documentation, including the conservation easement paperwork. The property is legally yours already, Eliza. This isn't part of my will or estate. I trust you to honor our vision for preserving this historic site and the stories it holds." I sat back in my office chair, stunned by the audacity of what Vincent had done. He'd fabricated documents knowing full well that Grandpa Walter had already transferred the lakeside property to me with specific preservation intentions. Even for Vincent, with his reputation for aggressive business tactics, this level of deception within our own family was breathtaking. My phone vibrated repeatedly with messages. My parents wanted to know where I'd disappeared to. Vincent had texted as well, "Nice exit strategy, Professor. Don't worry, you can still study the historic buildings if you ask permission. Maybe we'll name a plaque after you in the visitor center." That condescending message crystallized what I needed to do. I wouldn't confront him electronically or over the phone. This situation demanded a direct, face-to-face conversation with evidence in hand. I carefully gathered the documents, including the historic designation application we'd been working on, and placed everything back into Grandpa's archival box. According to the time, Vincent's event would continue for several more hours. I wiped my eyes, took a steadying breath, and headed back to my car with renewed determination. It was time for historical accuracy to be established. The drive to Vincent's new development gave me time to compose my thoughts. I had no intention of creating a dramatic scene. That wasn't my approach to conflict, and certainly not what Grandpa Walter would have advised. During our documentation projects, he'd often told me, "When primary sources support your position, Eliza, you never need theatrical presentations." The documented truth carries more weight than any elaborate fabrication. I parked a street away from Vincent's house, the wooden archival box secure on the passenger seat beside me. For several minutes, I remained there, gathering my courage and resolve. I thought about all the weekends spent with Grandpa Walter at the lakeside property, cataloging architectural details, interviewing elderly residents about the area's history, and recording his own memories of the region's development. I remembered his excitement when we'd secured preliminary approval for the historic designation, and how we'd celebrated on the wide porch overlooking the water, planning a small museum installation for the boathouse. "What approach would you take, Grandpa?" I whispered, running my fingers over the smooth, age-darkened wood of the box. The answer materialized in my mind with his characteristic clarity: present the facts with dignity and purpose, rather than returning directly to the party. I texted Naomi first, "How many people remain at the event?" She responded promptly, "Just family and close associates now. Most industry people and press have departed." "Are you returning?" This timing was ideal. I preferred to address this situation without an audience of business associates and reporters. I took the box and walked purposefully to Vincent's front entrance. When I rang the bell, Vincent himself answered, his expression shifting from surprise to defensive irritation. "Department emergency resolved already?" he asked, his tone making it clear he recognized my earlier excuse for the fiction it was. "We need to discuss something important, Vincent," I said with professional composure, stepping past him into the house. All eyes turned as I entered the expansive living room. My father was studying what appeared to be Vincent's development proposals, while my mother was engaged in conversation with Gabriella about potential interior design concepts for the lakeside property. Naomi sat observing from a corner armchair, her journalist's notebook discreetly open on her lap. "Eliza has returned," my mother announced unnecessarily. "We were just discussing Vincent's exciting plans for the Mitchell Heritage District." "Actually," I said, placing the archival box deliberately on the glass coffee table, "that's precisely what I need to address." Vincent's gaze fixed on the box, recognition and alarm flashing across his features. "What's that?" he asked, though his expression revealed he already suspected the answer. "Historical documentation that Grandpa Walter entrusted to me 3 weeks ago," I explained evenly, maintaining my professional demeanor. "He specifically instructed me not to open it until historical accuracy needed to be established." That moment has arrived. Before Vincent could interject, my father leaned forward with scholarly interest. "What exactly did you find, Eliza?" I opened the box and carefully removed the notarized deed and accompanying historical designation application. 6 months ago, Grandpa Walter legally transferred ownership of the lakeside property to me, I explained, placing the documents on the table where everyone could examine them. "It's already registered in my name with a conservation easement attached. The property isn't part of his estate or will, and it's in the final stages of receiving historic landmark status, which would prevent any significant development." A weighted silence descended on the room. My mother's expression registered shock, while my father picked up the deed, examining it with the careful attention of an academic. Vincent remained motionless, the color visibly draining from his face. "This is properly notarized," my father confirmed, adjusting his reading glasses as he scrutinized the document. "And I recognize Walter's signature. Notice the characteristic angle of the W he always used." "That's not possible," Vincent finally responded, his confident facade cracking. "Grandpa gave me authorization documents for the development. He wanted me to revitalize the area." "May I see those documents again?" I asked, extending my hand toward my father. He passed Vincent's papers to me, and I placed them alongside Grandpa Walter's authentic letter from the archival box. The differences were immediately apparent and unmistakable. The handwriting on Vincent's documents was a reasonable imitation but lacked the distinctive tremor caused by Grandpa's arthritis. The signature appeared too perfect, too controlled, without the hesitations evident in his genuine script. "Vincent," my mother said quietly, her museum curator's training evident in her careful examination of both documents, "did you fabricate these development authorizations?" His continued silence confirmed what we all now realized. Vincent's uncomfortable silence stretched for several moments before he finally spoke, his voice carrying a mixture of defiance and desperation. "You don't understand the market opportunity here. It's completely unreasonable that she gets control of historically significant property that could benefit the entire region economically. What exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, genuinely perplexed by his perspective. "You were always Grandpa's intellectual heir," Vincent said, words rushing out with years of pent-up resentment. "Always documenting everything, always discussing preservation theories, always the perfect academic granddaughter. The rest of us never had a chance to contribute our expertise or vision." My father cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Vincent, regardless of your feelings about property utilization, falsifying your grandfather's authorization is a serious ethical breach, possibly with legal implications." "Let me examine those more carefully," my mother interjected, reaching for both sets of documents. She compared them side by side, her trained curator's eye confirming what we already suspected. "Oh, Vincent," she sighed, disappointment evident in her voice. "How could you misrepresent Walter's intentions this way?" Gabriella rose slowly from her seat, her expression stricken. "I should give your family some privacy to discuss this," she murmured, avoiding Vincent's imploring look as she gathered her portfolio of design concepts and moved toward the door. "Gabriella, wait, I can explain the development opportunity." Vincent called after her, but she had already departed, the heavy front door closing with finality behind her. The room fell into uncomfortable silence again. Naomi caught my eye from across the room and gave me a supportive nod. As a journalist covering historical preservation issues, she had always recognized Vincent's dismissive attitude toward cultural heritage, even when my parents seemed blind to it. "I simply cannot comprehend this," my father said at last, turning to Vincent with the disappointed expression he typically reserved for students caught plagiarizing. "Why would you announce development plans without verifying your legal standing? The formal reading of the will isn't scheduled until next week." Vincent's face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. "I discovered information about the property transfer," he admitted reluctantly. "I was meeting with Grandpa's attorney last week regarding the estate distribution, and Thompson mentioned that the lakeside property wasn't included because alternative arrangements had been finalized. He refused to provide details due to confidentiality obligations, but I understood what it implied. I thought. I believed if I announced my development vision first, perhaps. Maybe what?" my mother pressed, her curator's training evident in her determination to catalog every detail of the situation. "Maybe Eliza would exchange the property for investment capital? Maybe the family would see the economic logic of my vision instead of her academic perspective," Vincent snapped, his composed business demeanor cracking as his voice rose. "Maybe I could contribute something meaningful to Grandpa's legacy too." His words hung in the air, revealing a jealousy far deeper than I had realized existed between us. Despite my anger, I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Had he genuinely felt so excluded from Grandpa Walter's intellectual world? "Vincent," I said quietly, "Grandpa invited you to participate in the Preservation Committee meetings dozens of times. You always claimed you were too occupied with development projects." Because I felt like an outsider in your academic circle, he retorted, pacing now. By the time I recognized the significance of what you two were documenting, the parameters were already established. You shared your specialized vocabulary, your preservation theories, your historical references. There was no space for a different perspective on utilizing those assets. My father shook his head, the disappointment of a lifetime educator evident in his expression. That cannot possibly justify fabricating documents and misleading the entire family about Walter's intentions. Vincent dropped heavily into a leather armchair, the entrepreneurial energy that typically animated him suddenly depleted. What's the next step then? He asked, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. You've established your historical accuracy, Eliza. Your academic rigor wins again. This isn't about winning some academic debate, I responded, thinking of Grandpa Walter and how he would handle this moment. Despite Vincent's deception, he remained my brother, and I knew our grandfather had valued Vincent's drive and vision, even while disagreeing with his methods. I reached once more into the archival box and withdrew something I hadn't previously mentioned, a sealed business envelope with Vincent's name written on it in Grandpa Walter's distinctive architectural lettering. He prepared something specifically for you as well, I said, extending it toward my brother. Vincent looked up, skepticism and cautious hope battling across his features. What is it? I haven't opened it, I admitted truthfully. Grandpa Walter was explicit that I should respect the privacy of any documentation not addressed directly to me. After a moment of hesitation, Vincent accepted the envelope and carefully broke the seal. As he read the contents, his expression transformed from defensive to astonished, finally settling into what appeared to be genuine contrition. He anticipated this, Vincent said finally, his voice barely audible. He predicted I might try to develop the lakeside property. My mother moved to sit beside him. What does Walter say in the letter, Vincent? Vincent paused, then handed her the document. Everyone should hear this, he said, his business confidence nowhere in evidence. My mother retrieved her reading glasses from her purse and began, Dear Vincent, if you're reading this letter, then Eliza has accessed my archival materials, which indicates one of two possibilities: either I've passed away, or circumstances have necessitated the disclosure of these documents sooner than expected. I've observed your development as a businessman since you were a determined young man selling handmade crafts at community markets, and I understand your entrepreneurial spirit. You've always sought recognition for your business acumen and vision, elements I perhaps failed to acknowledge adequately. However, I've also noticed that when you feel your expertise is undervalued, you sometimes make expedient decisions that compromise others' trust and ultimately undermine your own credibility. The lakeside property has been legally transferred to Eliza with conservation easements. This decision was made after considerable reflection and professional consultation, not because I valued your talents less, but because Eliza's connection to the historical significance of the property aligns with my preservation goals. She comprehends why this architectural record matters to our regional heritage, and I'm confident she'll maintain its historical integrity. What you require isn't another development property, Vincent, but a purposeful application of your business expertise. I've arranged for seed funding of $25,000 to be transferred to you. Apply it toward establishing something meaningful that harmonizes with preservation values. Perhaps consider the heritage tourism concept you mentioned during last Thanksgiving's dinner, or explore another venture that balances economic opportunity with cultural stewardship. I hope with time you'll recognize that this isn't about academic favorites or commercial fairness. It's about aligning the right steward with the right responsibility. Eliza will welcome your business perspective regarding the property's sustainable future, I'm certain, but your greatest contribution lies in building enterprises that respect historical context while creating economic value. With respect for your abilities, Walter Mitchell. When my mother finished reading, the room was completely silent. Vincent sat motionless, the check resting in his hand, his usual confidence temporarily abandoned. He understood my motivations completely, he murmured, even while disagreeing with my methods. My father moved to place a supportive hand on Vincent's shoulder. Your grandfather was remarkably perceptive about people's core drives. Vincent looked directly at me, perhaps genuinely seeing me as a colleague rather than a competitor for the first time in years. I apologize, Eliza. I had no right to misrepresent Grandpa's intentions for a property he had already legally entrusted to your care. The admission clearly cost him professionally, but sounded authentic nonetheless. I nodded, acknowledging his apology while not quite ready to offer complete reconciliation after such a significant breach of trust. There's additional documentation in the box, I said, reaching for it once more. I extracted a carefully preserved photo album and opened it to reveal images spanning decades. Vincent and me as children at the lakeside property, examining architectural details, helping Grandpa Walter document historic buildings in the surrounding area. He maintained this visual record in the antique desk at the cabin, I explained, turning pages to reveal more recent documentation. He consistently hoped you would eventually recognize the value in preservation alongside development. Vincent studied the photographs, genuine emotion replacing his business persona. I fundamentally misunderstood the situation, didn't I? Yes, I confirmed, not softening the reality, but Grandpa Walter clearly believed in your capacity to evolve your perspective. The room grew quiet again, but it was a different quality of silence, reflective rather than confrontational, melancholy rather than hostile. Naomi, who had been observing the entire exchange with a journalist's careful attention, finally spoke. What direction do things take from here? The question articulated what everyone was considering. How does a family progress after such a significant revelation? What path forward exists after deception and its painful acknowledgement? I closed the archival box carefully, feeling the weight of responsibility Grandpa Walter had entrusted to me, not just for the historic property, but perhaps for rebuilding our family relationships as well. Going forward, I said quietly, we should focus on honoring what Grandpa Walter envisioned for both of us. The gathering dispersed shortly afterward. My parents departed with worried glances toward Vincent, visibly torn between disappointment in his ethical lapse and concern for his professional reputation. Naomi gave me a supportive embrace before leaving, whispering, I'll call you tomorrow to check in. And then Vincent and I remained alone in his expansive new home, the earlier celebratory atmosphere completely dissolved. Vincent moved through his designer kitchen with uncharacteristic awkwardness, preparing coffee neither of us particularly wanted. The silence between us felt laden with decades of competition and mutual misunderstanding. The fabrication wasn't premeditated, he said finally, placing an artisanal ceramic mug before me. When I discovered the property transfer, I was furious and hurt. I created those documents that same evening, without any real intention to present them publicly. Then what prompted you to use them tonight? I asked, wrapping my hands around the warm mug and studying my brother's face. Vincent stared into his coffee as if searching for strategic insights. When everyone gathered here this evening to celebrate my latest acquisition, I wanted something more significant to announce. Something historic and meaningful. He looked up, his polished business veneer momentarily replaced by genuine vulnerability. I've always envied your intellectual connection with Grandpa Walter. That connection was available to you as well, I observed, keeping my tone professional rather than accusatory. He repeatedly invited your participation in the preservation projects. I recognize that now, Vincent acknowledged, but my pride and focus on immediate development opportunities prevented me from appreciating the value then. He hesitated before asking, "What are your intentions for the lakeside property?" It was the question I'd been considering since Grandpa Walter had transferred ownership to me 6 months earlier. Maintain its historical integrity while making it accessible for educational purposes. It needs conservation work, but I'm committed to preserving its architectural character and cultural significance. Vincent nodded, appearing genuinely relieved. That's appropriate. It should remain as Grandpa Walter envisioned it. I studied my brother, this person with whom I shared a lifetime of history but whose values often seemed completely foreign to my own. Your business expertise would be welcome in developing a sustainable management plan for the site, you know. When you're ready. His eyes widened slightly with surprise. Even after this evening's events? The lakeside property was intended to preserve family history, not fracture family relationships, I said, expressing what I believed Grandpa Walter would have advocated. That doesn't mean I'm not still angry, or that I don't need time to rebuild trust, but the opportunity for collaboration exists. Vincent seemed to recognize the conditional olive branch for what it represented. I appreciate that professional courtesy. We sat in silence for several more minutes, drinking coffee that had grown cold. The evening had been emotionally and intellectually exhausting, and much remained to be processed. I should leave, I said at last, standing to gather my materials. It's been a particularly challenging day. Vincent accompanied me to the door. Before I departed, he asked, "Do you think Grandpa Walter anticipated this conflict over the property's future?" I considered the meticulous preparation evident in Grandpa's documentation, the notarized transfer paperwork, the individually addressed letters, his specific instructions about when to open the archival box. I believe he hoped it wouldn't be necessary, I answered candidly, but he prudently prepared contingency documentation. Vincent shook his head, a rueful smile appearing. Always the strategic thinker, planning 3 steps ahead of everyone else. That was his particular genius, I agreed. As I drove home with the archival box secured beside me once more, I experienced an unusual mixture of emotions: regret for the evening's painful confrontation, professional satisfaction that historical accuracy had prevailed, and cautious optimism that perhaps this could represent a turning point in my relationship with Vincent. The old brass key to the lakeside property felt substantial in my pocket, not merely metal, but the tangible weight of historical stewardship that Grandpa Walter had entrusted to me, a responsibility I intended to honor fully. Yet perhaps there might be space for Vincent's perspective too, if he were willing to approach preservation with genuine respect. Tomorrow, I decided, I would visit the historic property, sit on the wide porch with its original balusters, observe the light changing across the water, and perhaps sense Grandpa Walter's guiding presence once more, helping us navigate toward reconciliation, even in his physical absence. The historic lakeside property appeared exactly as I remembered: weathered cedar shingles with their original patina, hunter green shutters with authentic 19th century hardware, and the architecturally significant wraparound porch that extended along 3 sides of the structure. As I navigated the gravel driveway, morning sunlight filtered through century-old pines, casting intricate patterns across the ground that seemed to welcome me back to this historic site. I remained in my car momentarily, absorbing the scene. This property was now officially under my stewardship, not merely a structure or real estate, but a living repository of regional history and personal memories. I could almost visualize Grandpa Walter in his favorite Adirondack chair, architect's sketchbook open on his lap, as he documented the building's unique structural elements in the afternoon light. The antique brass key turned in the lock with its characteristic resistance. The mechanism required a specific technique, a quirk Grandpa Walter had refused to modernize because, As he often explained, original hardware tells us how people actually lived with these buildings. Inside, everything remained precisely as he had left it. Architectural journals stacked methodically on the side table, surveying equipment organized in the study corner, the subtle aroma of his pipe tobacco lingering despite his doctor's repeated warnings about its effects on the preserved woodwork. I moved carefully through the rooms, my fingers lightly tracing the original millwork that had witnessed generations of our family's history. The stillness felt respectful rather than abandoned, as if the structure itself were patiently waiting to see how its story would continue. My phone vibrated with a message from Naomi. "How's the historic property? Your mother called this morning." Vincent appears to be experiencing a professional crisis of confidence. I responded, "The property's architectural integrity remains perfect." Still processing how to approach Vincent's situation. Naomi replied quickly, "He's been contacting various associates, attempting to explain his actions. Your parents remain significantly concerned about potential repercussions." I wasn't surprised. The consequences of last night's revelations would require time to resolve completely. Professional trust, once compromised, couldn't be immediately restored. Setting my phone aside, I approached the original bay window overlooking the lake. The water reflected morning light with timeless tranquility, serene and constant despite the human complications unfolding around it. "I'm here, Grandpa Walter," I whispered to the historic space. "I'll ensure this architectural heritage is properly preserved, just as we discussed." 3 weeks passed before Vincent initiated contact. His message was direct and professional. Would it be possible to discuss potential collaboration? At the lakeside property, perhaps? I considered for a full day before proposing a specific time and date. Part of me remained hesitant to share this historically significant space with him so soon, but Grandpa Walter's philosophy kept returning to mind. Historical preservation without reconciliation creates museums without meaning, Eliza. Sometimes accepting change benefits the preserver more than the preserved. When Vincent's car arrived the following Saturday, I was seated on the historic porch swing, reviewing preservation guidelines while enjoying morning coffee. He approached with uncharacteristic hesitation, appearing more subdued than I had observed in years. "The architectural integrity remains perfectly maintained," he observed, studying the structure's details. "That's our primary objective," I responded, indicating the period-appropriate chair across from me. He sat down, fingers tapping restlessly against his knees. "I've been drafting potential approaches to this conversation for weeks, but everything seems insufficient." "Present your perspective anyway," I suggested, maintaining professional neutrality. Vincent took a measured breath. "I apologize sincerely. Not merely for the document fabrication, but for everything preceding it. For resenting your academic connection with Grandpa Walter. For undermining your preservation work when I should have been examining my own developmental philosophy." I studied his expression, attempting to evaluate the authenticity behind his words. The Vincent I knew professionally had always been skilled at presenting whatever narrative benefited his business objectives. "What was your actual motivation?" I asked directly. "I need the unvarnished truth, Vincent." He gazed out across the lake, remaining silent for a considerable moment. I calculated that if I controlled the property, it would somehow compensate for all the preservation opportunities one neglected here, as if I could retroactively purchase those missed experiences. His professionally composed voice faltered slightly. "Completely irrational from a business perspective, isn't it?" There was an authenticity in his admission that felt genuine, not a strategic explanation, but rather a somber recognition of flawed reasoning. "I've invested the seed funding," he announced unexpectedly. "Grandpa Walter's financial contribution, for whatever it demonstrates." I've registered for that architectural preservation workshop he consistently recommended, the one I always claimed was incompatible with my development schedule. He offered a rare self-deprecating smile. It appears I have minimal natural talent for hand restoration techniques, but I'm committed to completing the certification. His assessment was accurate. There's something centering about focusing on preserving historical elements with your own hands. It was a modest beginning, but remarkably significant coming from Vincent, who had consistently prioritized efficiency and modernization over craftsmanship and tradition. He would have genuinely appreciated that commitment, I said quietly. We sat together in companionable silence, absorbing the gentle rhythmic sounds of water against the historic boathouse and the distant calls of native birds. It was the same natural acoustic environment that had accompanied countless historical documentation sessions between Grandpa Walter and me throughout the years. There's something historically significant I believe you should examine, I said finally, rising from my seat. Vincent followed me inside to Grandpa Walter's study, where the authentic Victorian roll-top desk occupied its original position in the eastern corner, illuminated by morning light filtering through the wavy glass of the original windows. I used the brass key from the archival box to unlock the desk's mechanism, revealing meticulously organized compartments containing correspondence, academic papers, and carefully preserved artifacts. Grandpa Walter maintained comprehensive documentation, I explained, retrieving a folder labeled Vincent Mitchell. Inside were preserved newspaper articles about Vincent's collegiate business competition victories, professional photographs from his MBA graduation ceremony, and even a carefully annotated printout of the Business Journal article announcing his development company's formation. He respected your professional accomplishments, I said honestly. He simply expressed his pride through documentation rather than the public recognition you preferred. Vincent's typically steady hands trembled visibly as he carefully examined the collection. I never realized he maintained such detailed records of my professional development. He created an archival folder for each family member, I explained. He referred to it as his legacy documentation project. Vincent looked up, unexpected emotion visible in his eyes. I fundamentally misinterpreted the entire situation, didn't I? Yes, I confirmed, maintaining historical accuracy, but Grandpa Walter clearly believed in professional evolution. As do I. I retrieved a conservation planning calendar from my research materials and presented it to him. I've scheduled several weekends dedicated to preservation assessments and conservation projects. Your business perspective would be valuable, even if your restoration techniques require refinement. A genuine smile appeared briefly. You're serious about collaboration? This historic property was intended to preserve our shared heritage, not exacerbate family divisions, I stated. That represents Grandpa Walter's fundamental vision. Later that afternoon, we sat on the rehabilitated dock, feet suspended above the clear water. Vincent outlined potential sustainable tourism concepts for the boathouse while I sketched possible adaptive reuse approaches in my documentation notebook. You understand, Vincent observed, gazing across the historically significant landscape. I believe Grandpa Walter made a completely rational decision in appointing you as steward for this property. How so? I asked. You didn't merely inherit a historic structure, he reflected thoughtfully. You inherited his responsibility for preserving what truly matters across generations. As the sun descended behind the western mountains, casting golden reflections across the protected waters, I realized Grandpa Walter had entrusted me with something far more significant than property rights. He'd provided the opportunity to repair fractured relationships and establish new collaborative approaches, beginning with the brother whose professional values had nearly created a permanent division between us. The notification banner popped up on my phone as I was reviewing patient charts in the hospital's quiet on-call room. My coffee had gone cold, forgotten during the 3 hours I'd been analyzing treatment outcomes. Family chat. Harper home mom. Allison is finally debt-free. So proud. Photo. Allison smiling with loan documents stamped paid in full. My fingers froze above the screen. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright, too harsh. I opened the family chat to see if I'd missed something. Had they paid off my loans too? The last several messages scrolled by mom's updates about their weekend plans, dad sharing an article about healthcare administration, Allison's news about her latest rotation, and now this bombshell, dropped casually into our group chat as if it was just another family announcement. My phone vibrated again. A private message from Allison. Allison, Mom just told me about paying off my loans. Did they do the same for you? I stared at her message, my throat tightening. The fact that she had to ask told me everything I needed to know. I started typing several responses, deleting each one before sending. No. Too short, too bitter. I guess I'm not as deserving. Too passive-aggressive. Congratulations. That's wonderful news. Too fake. Finally, I set my phone down without responding. The $250,000 in student debt that had been hanging over my head felt suddenly heavier. I picked up my lukewarm coffee and took a sip, grimacing at the bitter taste. My colleague Dr. Chin walked by, pausing at my workstation. You okay, Morgan? You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a smile. Nothing. Just family stuff. My phone pinged again. Mom, Morgan, did you see my message about Allison? Call me when you get off your shift. I took a deep breath and dialed. The phone rang 3 times before my mother answered. Morgan, honey, I was just about to text you again, Mom said, the sound of her arranging something in the background. I'm putting together those specialty cupcakes for Allison's celebration. The ones with the edible medical symbols on top. I saw your message about Allison's loans, I said, keeping my voice controlled despite the knot forming in my stomach. Did you and Dad pay them off? Yes, we did. Isn't it wonderful? She deserves it so much, Mom replied, not even pausing in her task. Allison's always been more dedicated to her studies. You've always had other interests. Her casual dismissal stung worse than a physical slap. I gripped my phone tighter, staring at the wall where my medical school diploma hung in my apartment, still fresh in its frame, the ink barely dry. Mom, we both graduated with honors, I said carefully, my voice steady despite the tremor in my free hand. We literally had identical GPAs. I don't understand why you and Dad would pay off all of Allison's loans, but none of mine. There was a pause, the sound of a tray being set down. Morgan, my mother finally said with that familiar tone of mild disappointment that I'd heard my entire life. Your sister doesn't have a prestigious mentor like Dr. Bennett taking an interest in her future. You've always had advantages Allison didn't. I nearly laughed out loud, the absurdity of it hitting me like a wave. Dr. Catherine Bennett was my research advisor because I'd earned that position through 80-hour weeks in the pediatric neurology lab, often sleeping on the office couch, while Allison was skiing in Aspen with our parents. The advantage had been working myself to exhaustion while my twin sister received our parents' unwavering emotional and financial support. So I'm being punished for finding my own mentorship opportunities? I asked, struggling to keep the hurt from my voice as I paced the small on-call room. I heard muffled voices, then my father came on the line. No one's punishing you, Morgan, he said, his hospital administrator voice in full effect. We're just being practical. Your sister needs more help than you do. You've always been more resourceful. Resourceful. The word echoed in my head. The same word they'd used to justify never attending my undergraduate research presentations while flying across the country for Allison's volleyball tournaments. Resourceful. Their explanation for why Allison got a new BMW for her 21st birthday while I received a $50 gas station gift card with a note saying, "For your commute to the lab." I scrolled through our family photos on my phone while they continued making excuses. There was Allison's volleyball championship, all four Harpers beaming with pride. And there was my science fair victory, a selfie I'd taken alone next to my project on neural plasticity. Tomorrow is Allison's debt-free celebration party, Mom said, interrupting my thoughts. We've invited extended family, her friends, even some of your former professors. The digital invitations read celebrating Allison's achievement. Doesn't that sound lovely? As if graduating medical school debt-free had been her accomplishment rather than our parents' financial decision. My phone pinged with the invitation even as we spoke, the celebration of my sister's achievement delivered in real time. I need to head out, I said finally, gathering my bag with my free hand. Early shift at the hospital tomorrow. Will you still make it to Allison's party? Mom asked, concern finally entering her voice, not for me, but for how my absence might affect my sister's special day. I'll be there, I promised, though the thought made my stomach twist into knots. I've got to go. I ended the call and sank into the chair, emotionally drained. As I was about to put my phone away, it buzzed with a message from Dr. Bennett. Need to speak with you ASAP about Patterson Fellowship. Call me when you can. Big news. I stared at the screen, a cold realization settling over me. I knew what this meant. My parents' favoritism wasn't just unfair, it was about to become publicly humiliating, and there was nothing I could do to stop what was coming. My thumb swiped through the digital album on my phone as I sat in my small apartment later that night. My twin sister Allison and I had been on oddly divergent paths since the moment we were born. I arrived first, she followed 6 minutes later. According to family lore, I was quiet and observant while Allison announced her arrival with strong, healthy cries. The photos from that day showed my father holding Allison, beaming with pride, while I was nestled in a nurse's arms. I paused on a childhood photo folder labeled Cleveland Days. Throughout our childhood in Cleveland's suburbs, the pattern was clear in every image. Allison was the outgoing twin, making friends easily and excelling at sports. I was quieter, more bookish, spending hours in our local library learning about everything from astronomy to zoology. I stopped on a particularly telling pair of photos. One showed my parents in the stands at Allison's regional volleyball tournament, wearing custom t-shirts with her face printed on them. The other showed my science fair victory, me standing alone next to my first-place project, taking a selfie with my ribbon. I'd texted that image to our family group chat. Mom had responded with thumbs up while Dad hadn't responded at all. I opened my laptop and logged into our old family digital archive. There was a folder from high school with videos of Allison's sports achievements. In one, my father's voice boomed with pride, "That's my girl. That's my star." I found a document from when we both announced our intentions to pursue medicine. There were dozens of congratulatory messages for Allison. For me, I found an email thread where my parents had expressed concerns about whether I could handle the pressure. Medical school isn't just about being smart, Morgan, my father had written. It's about determination and grit. Allison has always pushed herself harder. The irony was painful enough to make me close the laptop for a moment. I reached for my coffee mug, forgetting it was empty, and set it back down with a sigh. I reopened the laptop and scrolled through our college years at Ohio State. There were social media posts about Allison's volleyball scholarship, parents' weekend visits that happened to coincide with her tournaments but never with my academic events. Meanwhile, I'd maintained a perfect GPA while working part-time at the university research lab to cover expenses. I found screenshots of old text exchanges that told the story clearly. Me, Mom, Dad, I got that research grant I applied for. The department said my proposal was the best they'd seen from an undergraduate. Mom, that's nice, dear. Did you see Allison's Instagram post about making the tournament finals? When Allison struggled with organic chemistry and physics, our parents had immediately hired expensive tutors. When she needed to retake the MCAT, they paid for an exclusive prep course. I found the email where I'd asked for the same help and my father had responded, "You're smart enough to figure it out on your own, Morgan. There are free resources online." When I scored in the 98th percentile on my first MCAT attempt, their response in our family chat had been a simple "That's nice, dear," before changing the subject to Allison's new boyfriend. Despite everything, I'd never resented Allison. She was my sister, my twin, and I loved her. There were moments, captured in our private text threads, where we'd been there for each other through exams, heartbreaks, and achievements. She didn't create our parents' favoritism, she just benefited from it. Sometimes, in our private conversations, I sensed she felt uncomfortable with their obvious preference, though she never said anything directly. We both got accepted to the same medical school in Michigan, and for 4 years, we'd studied together, supported each other through grueling rotations, and celebrated each other's successes in ways our parents never had. I thought perhaps finally our parents would see us as equally accomplished. Instead, they found new ways to elevate Allison's achievements while minimizing mine. I found a photo from when I was selected to present research at a national conference. That same weekend, Allison had received an award for community service. Our family calendar showed clearly which event our parents had chosen to attend. I was about to close my laptop when I came across a folder of photos from last year when everything had changed. Dr. Catherine Bennett, a renowned neurosurgeon with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes, had taken notice of my research on pediatric traumatic brain injuries. There were photos of us in the lab, at conferences, and even one candid shot where she was pointing out something in my research with unmistakable pride. Under her mentorship, I'd flourished. For the first time, I had someone who recognized my potential, who pushed me to excel not despite my personality, but because of it. I found a voice memo I'd recorded after one particularly meaningful conversation. Dr. Bennett's voice was clear. "You have a gift for research, Morgan. You see patterns others miss. That kind of insight can't be taught." If only my parents could see me through her eyes. The fellowship news, the morning before Allison's celebration, I sat in my car outside Dr. Bennett's office building, gathering my courage. Her message had been cryptic but urgent: "Need to discuss Patterson Fellowship in person." Good news. My office, 9 a.m.? I'd barely slept, alternating between hope and anxiety. The Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins was the most prestigious neurosurgical research position in the country. Only one graduating medical student nationwide would receive it each year. I'd applied months ago, never truly believing I had a chance. Dr. Bennett's office reflected her status in the medical community. Awards lined the walls alongside published papers and photos with medical luminaries from around the world. She was a striking woman in her 60s with silver hair and penetrating blue eyes that missed nothing. When I entered, she was reviewing documents on her tablet, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. "Morgan," she said, looking up with a warm smile. "Close the door and sit down. I have extraordinary news." My heart raced as I took the seat across from her desk, my hands gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "The committee has made their decision on the Patterson Fellowship," Dr. Bennett said, her expression carefully neutral. I held my breath, afraid to hope. They've selected you, she continued, breaking into a broad smile. Congratulations, Dr. Morgan Harper. You're going to Baltimore. Joy, disbelief, and validation crashed over me in waves. My vision blurred with tears as I tried to process her words. The Patterson Fellowship, the pinnacle achievement for any neuro researcher, mine. I don't know what to say, I stammered, my voice catching. I glanced down at my phone, half expecting this to be a dream. You earned this, Dr. Bennett said firmly, leaning forward. Your research on neurovascular regeneration after traumatic injury was groundbreaking. The committee was particularly impressed with your dual approach, combining surgical innovation with pharmacological intervention. She tapped her tablet, and an official email appeared. The fellowship includes a generous stipend, housing allowance, and, most importantly, complete loan forgiveness. I stared at her, the full implications sinking in. Loan forgiveness? All of it? Dr. Bennett nodded. Every penny. You'll be debt-free, Morgan. I would be debt-free, just like Allison, but through my own merit rather than parental favoritism. I felt lightheaded with the realization, tears threatening to spill over. There's more, Dr. Bennett continued, her eyes twinkling with excitement as she leaned forward. I've been invited to Allison's celebration tonight. I received a digital invitation yesterday. Your parents extended it as a courtesy to faculty members, not knowing about our close mentorship. I'd like to announce the fellowship news there if you're comfortable with that. My stomach dropped like an elevator with cut cables. The thought of this public revelation made my mouth go dry. I don't know, Dr. Bennett, I said, fidgeting with my phone. It's supposed to be Allison's night. My parents might see it as me trying to steal her spotlight. They've already made it clear whose achievement they want to celebrate. Dr. Bennett's expression hardened slightly, the warmth in her eyes replaced by something steelier. Morgan, I've observed your family dynamic over the past 2 years, she said carefully, removing her reading glasses. I've seen your parents at hospital functions, heard how they speak about both you and your sister. The constant elevation of Allison and dismissal of your accomplishments isn't subtle. She tapped her fingers thoughtfully on her desk. I understand your hesitation, it speaks to your character. But sometimes, she paused, looking directly into my eyes, recognition needs to be public to be acknowledged at all. Especially by people who've shown a pattern of minimizing your achievements. I knew she was right. If my parents heard about the fellowship privately, they'd find a way to downplay it, attribute it to luck rather than achievement, or worse, suggest that Dr. Bennett had pulled strings on my behalf. Okay, I nodded slowly, my heart racing with a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. You can announce it. Dr. Bennett's smile returned. Good. This achievement deserves recognition, Morgan. You've earned this moment. As I left her office, my phone vibrated with multiple notifications. I checked it while waiting for the elevator and saw a WhatsApp message from Allison. Mom's going completely overboard for tonight. It's embarrassing. Wish she'd put this much effort into celebrating both of us graduating. See you there. I stared at the message in confusion, blinking twice to make sure I'd read it correctly. It was the first time Allison had ever explicitly acknowledged our parents' unequal treatment. I started typing several responses, deleting each one, unsure how to navigate this unexpected alliance. Before I could formulate a response, another message appeared, this time from my mother. Don't forget business casual for tonight, and please let your sister have her moment. This is very important to her. Several hospital board members will be there. I quickly took a screenshot of both messages and saved them to my Family Dynamics folder, a digital archive of evidence I'd been collecting for years, though I wasn't sure why. Perhaps as proof to myself that I wasn't imagining things. The contrast between the two messages was jarring. Perhaps I had been wrong about Allison all along. Perhaps tonight would reveal truths my parents had been avoiding for 32 years. At the celebration, Allison's debt-free celebration was being held at an upscale restaurant in downtown Detroit with a spectacular view of the river. I could see the expense from the moment I pulled up valet parking, champagne greeting, professional photographer. My parents had rented out the entire rooftop terrace, an extravagance that surely cost thousands. I checked my appearance in the elevator's mirrored wall, smoothing down my navy blue dress, simple but elegant, purchased on sale last month. As the doors opened to the rooftop, I was greeted by a large digital display reading, "Congratulations, Dr. Allison Harper," with a professional portrait of her in her graduation regalia. There was no mention that there were, in fact, 2 Dr. Harpers in the family now. Several guests were already taking selfies with the display, posting them in real time to Instagram. I spotted my mother's carefully curated hashtag Proud Harper Parents, hashtag Dr. Daughter. I took a deep breath, reminding myself this was Allison's night, regardless of what Dr. Bennett planned to announce. I wouldn't let years of resentment ruin my relationship with my twin. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Bennett, running 15 minutes late. Traffic. Don't let them corner you before I get there. Morgan. Allison spotted me immediately, breaking away from a group of relatives to rush over. She looked stunning in a silver cocktail dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair identical to mine in color but cut in a trendy bob, while I kept mine long and simply styled. She hugged me tightly. "Thank God you're here," she whispered in my ear. "Aunt Patty has asked me 5 times if I have a boyfriend yet, and Mom keeps parading me around like I've won a Nobel Prize instead of just getting out of debt." I laughed despite my nerves, genuinely relieved to see her. "What did you tell Aunt Patty? That you're married to medicine? Though if she knows any eligible neurosurgeons, I'm taking applications." Allison linked her arm through mine, leading me toward the bar. "Seriously, though, this is ridiculous," she said, grabbing 2 champagne flutes from a passing waiter. "Mom invited half the medical school faculty. Dean Wilson is here with his wife. And look," she discreetly pointed across the terrace's Dr. Reynolds from Detroit Medical Center. "Isn't that where we both applied for residency?" I scanned the crowded terrace and indeed spotted the dean chatting with our father. Dr. Olivia Reynolds, the chief neurosurgeon, was nearby, looking impressive in a tailored suit. Wow, they really went all out. Too all out. It's mortifying. Allison lowered her voice, checking to make sure no one was within earshot. "And why just for me? We both graduated with honors. We both worked our asses off." She handed me a champagne flute. "Mom's been posting about this all week on Facebook. Our daughter the doctor. Singular. As if you don't exist." The knot in my stomach loosened slightly. Maybe Allison was more aware than I'd given her credit for. I wanted to respond, to finally have this conversation we'd been avoiding for years, but before I could say anything, I heard my mother's voice. "Morgan, Allison," our mother approached, champagne in one hand and her phone in the other, clearly in the middle of documenting the event. "Allison, the Hendersons just arrived. You remember Thomas Henderson, the chief of surgery at Cleveland Memorial? The one Dad's been telling you about? You should come say hello." She took Allison's arm, effectively separating us. Then glanced back at me with that dismissive look I knew so well. "Morgan, could you check if the caterers have put out the gluten-free options? Your cousin Beth is being difficult about her diet again. Oh, and make sure they know to bring out the special cake at 8:30 sharp." And just like that, I was relegated to catering management while Allison was paraded before hospital administrators who could influence her career. Some things never changed. I watched as my mother guided Allison toward a group of important-looking older physicians, her hand protectively on my sister's back. My phone buzzed with a new message from Allison, "Save me." SOS button. I was smiling at her text while directing waitstaff to the correct table when Dr. Bennett arrived. She looked elegant and formidable in a crimson pantsuit, commanding attention without effort. Several heads turned as she stepped onto the terrace. "Morgan," she said warmly, embracing me. "Sorry I'm late. The traffic was terrible." She looked around the party, taking in the scene. "Are you ready for our announcement?" I glanced across the room where my parents were introducing Allison to yet another hospital administrator. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "The timing feels complicated." Dr. Bennett surveyed the party more carefully, taking in the banner, the professionally decorated cake with just Allison's name, the slideshow of photos on a large digital display that featured Allison prominently with me occasionally visible in the background or sometimes cropped out entirely. She noticed my father's animated conversation with Dr. Reynolds, clearly discussing something related to Allison based on their gestures toward her. "I see," Dr. Bennett said quietly, her voice carrying a note of controlled anger, more complicated than I realized. The confrontation across the terrace, I watched as my parents introduced Allison to Dr. Olivia Reynolds, the chief neurosurgeon at Detroit Medical Center. Both Allison and I had applied for residency positions there, but the way my father was animatedly gesturing and my mother was beaming proudly made it clear what was happening. My stomach clenched. They were trying to secure Allison a spot through personal connections, the very definition of the networking they'd always prioritized over merit. Someone nearby was capturing the moment on their phone, no doubt for the event's Instagram hashtag. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm me. "Dr. Bennett." My father had spotted her and was now approaching with my mother and Allison in tow, his face shifting into what I recognized as his networking smile. "What an honor to have you join us. The invitation was somewhat last minute, we weren't sure you'd make it." "I wouldn't miss it," Dr. Bennett replied with professional courtesy. "Congratulations on having two brilliant daughters graduate medical school." "Thank you," my father said with a practiced chuckle. "I understand you've done some work with Morgan?" "Some work?" Dr. Bennett raised an eyebrow, her voice cooling several degrees. "Morgan has been my primary research partner for the past 2 years. Her contribution to our traumatic brain injury study was instrumental to its success. In fact, our paper is being published in the Journal of Neurosurgical Research next month." My parents exchanged a glance I couldn't quite interpret, surprise mixed with something like confusion, as if they couldn't reconcile this information with their perception of me. My mother's Instagram-ready smile faltered momentarily. "How nice," my mother said vaguely, her hand still firmly on Allison's shoulder. Allison has also been very involved in neurosurgical research. In fact, Dr. Reynolds was just saying how impressed she is with Allison's application to her program. I felt a flush of anger rising in my cheeks, my hands clenching involuntarily at my sides. Allison hadn't done neurosurgical research, her focus was neuropsychiatry, an entirely different field. My parents were blatantly misrepresenting her experience, potentially at the expense of my own opportunities. I caught Allison's eye and saw her discomfort. Dr. Bennett's expression remained pleasant, but I could see a steely glint in her eyes that I'd witnessed when she confronted medical board politics. "Is that so? How fascinating," she said with deliberate precision. I was under the impression that Allison's focus was on psychiatric applications rather than surgical interventions. Her work on trauma-induced psychological disorders is quite different from Morgan's surgical research. An awkward silence fell over our small group. Allison looked mortified, shooting me an apologetic glance. My father cleared his throat, clearly searching for a way to salvage the conversation. My phone vibrated in my clutch. A message from Dr. Bennett that she must have typed while maintaining perfect eye contact with my parents. This is worse than I thought. Stay strong. A waiter announced that dinner was being served, offering a momentary reprieve from the tension. The seating arrangements, however, made it clear where I stood in the family hierarchy. My parents were at the head table alongside Allison, our grandparents, and Dr. Reynolds. I was placed at a secondary table with cousins and family friends, close enough to hear the conversation but not participate in it. We always knew Allison was destined for greatness, my father was saying to Dr. Reynolds, his voice carrying deliberately. Even when the girls were little, Allison showed such determination. She's always been our ambitious one. Each word was a tiny dagger. I pushed my perfectly plated filet mignon around my plate, appetite gone. Nearby, Dr. Bennett was seated with other faculty members, occasionally catching my eye with sympathetic glances. Several guests were live-streaming portions of the event to Instagram, and I could see my mother checking the social media response on her phone between courses. After dinner was served, my father stood and tapped his glass for attention. The room quieted as phones were raised to capture the moment. Thank you all for coming to celebrate our daughter Allison's remarkable achievement, he began, his hospital administrator voice in full effect. As many of you know, medical school is a grueling journey, and to emerge not only with a degree but debt-free is truly something special. The crowd applauded politely. Several people were uploading his speech directly to social media. I noticed Allison looking increasingly uncomfortable, her eyes darting between me and our father. We're blessed to have been able to support Allison throughout her education, my mother added, standing to join my father, camera ready in her designer dress. We always believed in investing in her future because we knew she would make us proud. I stared at my plate, hot tears threatening to spill over. The wording was precise and deliberate. They had invested in Allison, not in both their daughters. The message couldn't be clearer to everyone in attendance. Actually, Allison said suddenly, standing up and taking the microphone from my surprised father, I'd like to say something. She looked directly at me, her expression apologetic and determined. This celebration feels incomplete. Morgan and I both graduated with identical GPAs. We both worked incredibly hard, and frankly, Morgan worked harder because she did it without the support system I had. A hush fell over the crowd. My parents looked stunned, their carefully choreographed evening suddenly veering off script. Several phones were still recording, capturing this unexpected turn of events. Allison, my mother whispered loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear, this isn't the time. It's exactly the time, Allison insisted, her voice steady but firm as she addressed the room. I can't accept recognition that excludes my sister. It's not right, and it never has been. While I'm grateful to be debt-free, I didn't earn that status, our parents did that for me. Meanwhile, Morgan has been working twice as hard with half the recognition. My throat tightened with emotion, a single tear escaping before I could stop it. After all these years, Allison was publicly acknowledging the imbalance. It was both vindicating and heartbreaking to have the family secret exposed under the crystal chandeliers and watchful eyes of Detroit's medical elite. My father recovered quickly, taking back the microphone with a strained laugh. Of course, we're proud of both our girls, he said, his voice overly jovial. Morgan has done very well too, but tonight is about celebrating Allison being debt-free, which is a special achievement. An achievement you facilitated, not one I earned, Allison countered, her voice carrying even without the microphone. I didn't do anything to deserve this celebration that Morgan didn't also do. The tension in the room was palpable. Several guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was quickly becoming the scene my parents had always feared, their perfect family image cracking in public, and worse, being documented on dozens of phones. Dr. Bennett chose that moment to stand, her commanding presence drawing all eyes. "If I might add something to this conversation," she said, her authoritative voice cutting through the murmurs as she moved to the front of the room. "This seems like an opportune time to share some news about Morgan that many of you may not be aware of." My parents exchanged worried glances, their practiced smiles faltering. Morgan's research on neurovascular regeneration has earned her the Patterson Fellowship at Johns Hopkins, Dr. Bennett announced. For those unfamiliar with the significance of this honor, this is the single most prestigious position offered to a graduating medical student in the country. It comes with full loan forgiveness and a substantial stipend. Gasps and murmurs spread through the room. Dr. Reynolds was looking at me with new interest. My cousins were whispering excitedly, phones forgotten in their hands. The party photographer abandoned the planned shots to capture this moment instead. In fact, Dr. Bennett continued, commanding the room with the same presence she brought to the operating theater. The selection committee specifically cited Morgan's innovative dual-approach methodology, which she developed largely independently while balancing a full clinical rotation schedule. She paused, surveying the room before continuing. "I've had the privilege of mentoring many promising physicians throughout my career, but rarely have I encountered the level of dedication and insight that Morgan consistently demonstrates. Her work will save lives, potentially thousands of them." The room erupted in applause, genuine, enthusiastic applause for me. People were turning in their seats to look in my direction, smiling and nodding with respect. Someone shouted congratulations. My second cousin immediately changed the Instagram caption on the photo she'd just posted, tagging me with #medicalgenius. My parents remained frozen at the head table, their expressions a complicated mix of shock, confusion, and dawning horror as they realized that their carefully constructed narrative about their daughters was publicly unraveling in front of the very people they'd been trying to impress for decades. The aftermath: Allison was beaming at me from across the room, not a hint of jealousy in her expression as she applauded along with everyone else. Dr. Bennett wasn't finished. She raised her hand to quiet the applause, her commanding presence ensuring immediate silence. Additionally, she continued, her voice carrying throughout the terrace, "I'm pleased to announce that I've personally arranged for the remainder of Morgan's medical school loans to be covered through our department's Merit Scholarship Fund, a decision unanimously approved by the board in recognition of her extraordinary contributions to our research program." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. I felt lightheaded with disbelief. I was debt-free too, and I had earned it through my own merit. Dr. Bennett caught my eye across the room and gave me a subtle nod that conveyed everything words couldn't: vindication, pride, and the shared satisfaction of justice finally served. My phone started vibrating continuously in my clutch as notifications poured in, colleagues tagging me in congratulatory posts, professional connections sending messages, the medical community I'd worked so hard to impress finally taking notice. After Dr. Bennett's announcement, the celebration shifted dramatically. The energy in the room realigned like iron filings responding to a new magnetic field. Faculty members who had previously gravitated toward Allison were now approaching me, business cards in hand, asking about my research methodology and congratulating me on the fellowship. "Your work on pediatric neuroplasticity after trauma is fascinating," said the neurology department chair, a woman who had barely acknowledged me during rounds. "I'd love to discuss your findings further before you leave for Baltimore." Several of my clinical supervisors shared glowing stories about my work with patients that I hadn't realized they'd even noticed. "Remember that 8-year-old with the severe TBI from the car accident?" Dr. Patel asked a group of colleagues gathered around me. Morgan identified subtle indicators of improving function that the rest of us missed. The child is walking today because of her observation. My parents remained at their table, shock still evident on their faces as they watched the scene unfold. They weren't just processing the news of my fellowship and loan forgiveness, they were witnessing the dismantling of the narrative they'd constructed about their daughters. The quiet, self-sufficient twin they had consistently overlooked was now the center of professional admiration, while their carefully orchestrated celebration had become an entirely different event than the one they'd planned. My mother was frantically whispering to my father, her social media forgotten beside her half-eaten dessert. Their perfect family tableau was crumbling in real time, and for once, they had no script to follow. Allison made her way through the crowd to my side, 2 champagne flutes in hand. "Congratulations, sis," she said warmly, clinking her glass against mine. "The Patterson Fellowship. That's incredible. Why didn't you tell me?" "I only found out this morning," I said, the reality of it still sinking in. "And I didn't want to overshadow your celebration." Allison frowned, her eyes showing genuine dismay. "This ridiculous party was Mom and Dad's idea, not mine," she said, lowering her voice. "I tried to tell them it was over the top and unfair to you, but you know how they get once they've decided something. Dad was talking about networking opportunities and Mom was obsessed with getting the perfect photos for their Christmas newsletter." "You did?" I asked, genuinely surprised by her admission. "You tried to talk them out of it?" "Of course I did." Allison looked hurt that I would doubt her. "Morgan, I've always known they treated us differently. She hesitated, glancing toward our parents. I didn't know how to fix it without making things worse. I was afraid if I pushed back too hard, they'd pull their support entirely. "I know that sounds cowardly, but it's not cowardly," I interrupted, squeezing her hand. "They put you in an impossible position." Before Allison could respond, Dr. Olivia Reynolds approached us, her expression entirely different from earlier when she'd been chatting with my parents. "Dr. Harper," she said, looking directly at me rather than Allison, "I was very impressed by Dr. Bennett's account of your research. We should discuss whether you'd consider bringing your work to our neurosurgery department instead of Johns Hopkins after your fellowship." I blinked in surprise, unprepared for this sudden professional interest from someone who'd barely glanced my way earlier. "That's very flattering, Dr. Reynolds, but she's already accepted the Patterson," Allison interjected, putting her arm around my shoulders proudly. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for her research." She smiled confidently at Dr. Reynolds. "But you should know my sister never does just one revolutionary thing at a time. I'd bet she'll have another groundbreaking study underway within months of arriving in Baltimore. Her work on neural regeneration pathways has implications for your trauma center." Dr. Reynolds raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed by Allison's confident advocacy. "Well, when you've completed the fellowship, keep Detroit in mind. We'd be fortunate to have you," she nodded to Allison, "both of you in your respective specialties. The neuropsychiatric applications of Morgan's surgical techniques could create an impressive integrated treatment program." After she walked away, I turned to Allison in amazement. "You didn't have to do that. I know Detroit Medical was your top choice for residency. I know you wanted to stay in Detroit for your residency too," I said, still processing her support. "And I still can," Allison replied firmly. "But I won't do it by letting Mom and Dad manipulate the situation or by letting you miss out on opportunities. That's not who I want to be. Not anymore." Across the room, I saw our parents finally rising from their table, moving hesitantly in our direction. Their path was slow, interrupted by guests who wanted to talk about me, a novel experience that was clearly unsettling for them. My mother's practiced smile looked strained, and my father's confident posture had diminished. "Here they come," Allison murmured, squeezing my arm. "Ready for this?" "Not really," I admitted, taking another sip of champagne for courage. "Dr. Bennett certainly had some impressive things to say about you," my father said when they finally reached us, his tone carefully calibrated to sound proud while masking his confusion. His eyes darted around, noticing how many influential medical professionals were suddenly interested in his other daughter. "The Patterson Fellowship, that's quite an honor," my mother added, a hint of accusation in her voice. "Why didn't you tell us you were even being considered for something so prestigious? We could have helped prepare you for the interview." "Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly, meeting her eyes directly. "You've made it clear where your support and interest lie." My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That's not fair, Morgan," my father began, his administrator voice slipping. "We've always supported both of you, differently," my mother interjected quickly, her social smile fixed in place as she noticed people watching our interaction. "We supported you both differently because you had different needs. Allison needed more guidance, while you've always been so independent." Allison shook her head, her patience visibly exhausted. "Mom, Dad, let's not do this tonight," she said firmly. "But we are going to have a real conversation about this soon, all of us." She gave me a meaningful look. "No more pretending." Dr. Bennett appeared at my elbow, saving me from having to respond. "Morgan, the dean would like a word, something about featuring your fellowship in the alumni magazine." She smiled at my parents, her expression pleasant but her eyes steely. "You must be incredibly proud to have raised two such accomplished daughters, though I imagine it's particularly gratifying to see Morgan's hard work recognized after all she's overcome." The emphasis on overcome was subtle but unmistakable. My parents had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well," my mother said weakly, her voice lacking its usual confidence, "we've always known Morgan was special too. Too little, too late." 1 week later, the week after the celebration was transformative. News of my Patterson Fellowship went viral in Detroit's medical community, first through the event's hashtag that had captured Dr. Bennett's announcement, then through the university's official announcement, and finally through industry publications picking up the story. Suddenly, doors that had been closed to me swung open. My inbox was flooded with congratulatory emails and invitations to collaborate. Former professors who had given Allison extensions but denied mine were now emailing to ask if I would speak to their classes about my research methodology. Classmates who had barely acknowledged my existence during 4 years of medical school suddenly claimed close friendship in public posts, tagging me in throwback photos where I was barely visible in the background. The day after the party, my parents, meanwhile, were attempting damage control. The morning after the celebration, I received a notification from the delivery app one rarely used. "Package from Richard and Patricia Harper arriving today between 2 to 4 p.m. They showed up at my modest apartment precisely at 2:15, bearing glossy gift bags and wearing forced smiles that didn't reach their eyes. I'd just finished a 14-hour shift at the hospital and had barely slept, but they insisted this couldn't wait. "We've been thinking," my father said as he placed a small box on my coffee table, carefully avoiding the stack of research journals and grant application drafts. "With both of you graduating and starting your careers, we should get you girls something special. We got you this." Inside was a rose gold watch with a mother-of-pearl face, identical to the one they'd given Allison for her birthday 6 months earlier. I remembered it well. They'd posted multiple photos of that celebration on Facebook, tagging everyone except me. "It's lovely," I said without reaching for it, my arms crossed defensively across my chest. "Though a bit late." My mother flinched visibly, her hand fluttering to her perfectly styled hair. "Morgan, we know you must feel overlooked sometimes," she said in the same tone she used with difficult parents in her high school parent-teacher conferences, but everything we did was because we knew you could handle challenges on your own. Allison needed more support. That's a convenient narrative, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the exhaustion and lingering hurt. But it doesn't explain why you attended her presentations but skipped mine, why you paid for her MCAT prep course but told me to use free online resources, why you covered her living expenses during medical school but suggested I take out additional loans for mine. The bitter truth of these examples hung in the air between us. My father shifted uncomfortably on my threadbare couch, the same furniture I'd had since college because every spare dollar went toward my education and research. "We only have so much money, Morgan," my father protested, the hospital administrator who managed a multi-million-dollar budget now suddenly claiming financial limitations. "We had to make choices." "Yes, you did," I agreed, maintaining eye contact despite my instinct to look away. "And consistently, you chose Allison." My mother's eyes filled with tears, her carefully applied makeup threatening to smudge. "We love you both equally," she insisted, reaching for my hand. I let her touch me but didn't return the pressure. "Maybe you do," I conceded, allowing for the possibility that in their hearts, somewhere deep down, they genuinely believed that. "But you haven't treated us equally, and watches and belated recognition won't change the past 26 years. My phone rang, the specialized ringtone I'd assigned to Dr. Bennett. I answered it gratefully, turning away from my parents' stunned faces. "Yes, I'm available to discuss the housing options," I said, relief flooding through me at the sound of her steady, supportive voice. "In fact, your timing is perfect." 3 weeks later, I stood in my empty apartment, the last boxes packed and labeled for the moving company. The bare walls showed faded rectangles where my medical certificates and research posters had hung. My phone pinged with notifications at Dr. Bennett sending Baltimore apartment listings, fellow researchers from Johns Hopkins welcoming me to the team, and continuous messages from former classmates still trying to claim close friendship. Allison sat on the windowsill watching me tape up a final container of books on neuroanatomy. She'd brought pizza and helped pack for the last 3 hours, working silently alongside me with an efficiency we developed during our study sessions. "I still can't believe you're leaving next week," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Detroit won't be the same without you. You'll be too busy with your neuropsychiatry residency to notice I'm gone," I teased, though there was truth in it. We'd been inseparable through medical school, but our paths were finally diverging, mine to Johns Hopkins, hers staying at Detroit Medical. "I keep thinking about what Mom and Dad did," Allison said suddenly, looking out at the city skyline. "Or didn't do, I guess. All these years, I thought I was the lucky one because they paid more attention to me, but they were really holding me back, making me dependent on their approval." I sealed the box with one final strip of tape before sitting beside her on the windowsill. Our reflections appeared side by side in the glass, identical in features but different in expression. For once, I looked more at peace than she did. "You didn't do anything wrong, ally," I said gently. "I didn't do enough right either," she countered, turning to face me. I should have spoken up sooner. I knew it wasn't fair, but it was easier to accept their favoritism than to challenge it. She sighed, pulling her knees up to her chest. "They're devastated, you know. Mom keeps crying about how you must hate them. Dad's telling everyone who will listen about his brilliant daughter at Johns Hopkins like he personally funded your research." I couldn't help but smile at the irony. "Let them," I said, surprising myself with how little it bothered me now. "Their approval doesn't define me anymore." And it was true. The constant ache of seeking validation from parents who had never truly seen me had finally subsided. Dr. Bennett's mentorship had shown me what genuine support looked like, challenging me when I needed pushing, defending me when I needed protection, and always seeing my potential without qualification. "So, what happens now?" Allison asked, her voice small. "With us, I mean. I don't want to lose my sister because our parents are messed up." I took her hand, noticing how our identical fingers intertwined, two parts of the same whole. We find our own way forward without the competition they created between us. We support each other's careers, celebrate each other's victories, pick each other up after failures. "I'd like that," Allison smiled, squeezing my hand. Her phone buzzed with a notification, and she laughed when she checked it. Mom just tagged me in another Facebook post, throwback photo of us in matching dresses, captioned, "So proud of both my doctor daughters." Damage control in full swing. "Let her try," I said with a shrug. "It doesn't change what's real between us." "Dr. Morgan Harper, Patterson Fellow," Allison said, bumping her shoulder against mine. "I'm so proud of you, sis. Always have been, even when I didn't say it." My phone chimed with a reminder, "Baltimore apartment virtual tour, 1 hour." The future was calling, and for once, it felt entirely mine. For the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. The path ahead was challenging but clear, and entirely mine to navigate on my own terms. The weight of parental expectations had finally lifted, replaced by the lightness of genuine achievement and self-worth.